Hello, I'm Nick Miron, a core trainer with Roots of Justice, a collaborative seeking liberation from oppression for all people. We offer a number of different trainings and retreats. You can find out some more information about them on our website at rootsofjusticetraining.org. And I encourage you to look at our Facebook page where we offer perspective, articles, and upcoming events. Our base training is a 2.5-day, 20-hour anti-racism analysis. During this time, we define racism. So when we come together to talk about it, we're all talking about the same thing. We analyze the power of racism as a system of oppression and identify its purpose, who it was created by and for. To help make sense of such a complex and pervasive structure, one that gives us a sense of self and gives us the institutions and systems we believe we need, Roots of Justice uses an iceberg as a metaphor. During this short video, I'll use the iceberg metaphor as a tool to help process all the varied responses we're seeing and hearing today to police brutality. So let's get to it. Just like an iceberg, racism is multidimensional and multi-layered. Roots of Justice has identified 3 different parts to the iceberg racism, and it's important to understand that no one part is more or less important than the other. It takes them all to make racism. However, if we don't recognize the way that racism operates differently in different places, then our work to eliminate it may not have the impact of our intent. As our trainer Conrad Moore says, the diagnosis determines the treatment. So let's work through our iceberg. The tip, what we call oppressive power, what we can see is the power of racism to oppress. We see mass incarceration, we see police brutality, disparities in education, access to health care, housing, wealth, virtually any category of life in the United States. We can see the work of racism to oppress. Going below the surface, what we can see is WP, what we call white power. That's the core of racism. That's what it's about, why it exists. It was created by and for white people to provide and maintain access and control of power. The bottom of the iceberg we call IP, as identity power. That's the ability of racism to shape our sense of self, how we see ourselves and how we see others. It also shapes our sense of what institutions are, what they're for, and systems. So let's narrow it down to policing. And we'll start off with the identity power layer of the iceberg. As a young white man growing up in a mostly white community, I was socialized to believe that police as a system was inherently good, and that the police were there to protect and serve. I didn't recognize at the time that they were there to protect and serve people like me, but I thought that they were inherently good. Part of the harm that identity power layer has is in creating a binary, a narrative of good versus bad. The reality, of course, is good people can do bad things and bad people can do good things. So it's not really a helpful perspective to apply to such a complex and harmful structure as racism. However, if that lens is applied to oppressive power, if my belief that police are good is applied to the police brutality that I'm seeing and hearing so much about right now, it's going to impact the way I believe we should treat it. And I might be likely to say, well, we should just get rid of the bad apples because the police are inherently good. And so we address the bad apples. We do sensitivity training, anti-bias training. We hire a diverse work staff. We recruit Black and Indigenous people of color. And we focus on police community relationships. We bring in people from the community together with police officers, and they can learn to get to know one another. And it's important to understand those aren't necessarily harmful ways of responding. They may have some healthy impact. However, it does skip the white power core of what policing is about. Understanding the core of policing, what it's really about, is important as we determine ways to end police brutality. In the South, policing originated with slave patrols to catch and return runaway slaves and, in times, enslave free people. In the North, policing began as strike breakers as a way to protect the property and interests of wealthy people. Over the years, as those forces morphed, it becomes clear why, in the case of Standing Rock Reservation, the police were not there to protect the people, but to protect the property interests of a wealthy corporation. And it becomes clear as to why, with mass incarceration that are often operated for profit, it becomes necessary to fill the prisons. And so black and brown people in New York City are frisked at much higher levels than white people. And why police brutality, such as the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, still occur. Understanding oppressive power through that lens, it begins to make sense why some are calling for defunding the police or disbanding the police, because it becomes clear that policing may not be capable of being reformed if its roots are in the protection of white property and white people. I think it should be clear too, defunding and disbanding the police doesn't mean we'll have nobody. This wonderful graphic that you're looking at now, I think is a really powerful way to imagine what could be. As a friend of Roots of Justice once told me, Reverend Naomi Washington Leapart, white supremacy limits the imagination. And so a lot of people might be concerned about what would happen if there's no police. This is what could happen. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check us out on Facebook or at our website, rootsofjusticetraining.org. We have live events coming up on Facebook and some training opportunities that we'll be sharing. So again, thank you and do justice.
Come and go with me to that land